Hong Kong has once again become the focus of international attention on the 13th of August, as the airport authority claimed that all outbound flights were cancelled. Sure, this was a visually appealing and striking PR stunt, but the dashboards littered with red cancelled labels were simply yet another pack of lies. Many flights, in fact, took off as scheduled, especially those run by Cathay Pacific. This was confirmed by multiple passengers, members of airline staff, and flight trackers such as Flight Radar. This begs the question, was the airport authority defrauding the public intentionally? Was this another desperate and underhanded attempt by the government to manufacture blame to pin onto the protesters? Did the government realise or care that this childish attempt would waste the precious time of and cause entirely unnecessary stress and economic loss to visitors? These good people are perfectly within their right to come to our city to have a good time without getting involved in the government's drama. We are saddened to see that the authorities have chosen to waste their time and resources on offloading their own responsibilities onto protesters rather than to attend to the real culprit, its own failure to address the 5 demands of its own citizens. Is this the level of efficiency that us citizens and the rest of the world should come to expect of Hong Kong's government from here on out? The government relentlessly attempts to divide and weaken widespread support of protesters through its allegation of an economic depression due to the protests. What happened at the airport might have driven home to some people the assumption that the ongoing protests have sabotaged both aviation and tourism, and thus the economy. However, one must be careful in identifying the cause and effect within this narrative. There are 3 points I would particularly like to raise. Firstly, the government attempted to use the protests, which started in the 3rd quarter, to explain the economic downturn that started in the 2nd quarter. Particularly due to the heated trade war between China and the US, the economy had already started to decline in the 1st quarter of the year, even before the anti-extradition movement. It doesn't take an expert in economics to see that that is simply a logical fallacy. What has come later cannot cause what has come before. Secondly, the government's attempt to draw a straightforward and singular causal connection between the protests and any economic downturn is an overly simplistic explanation and sure to frustrate any self-respecting economist. If the numerous and complex factors working together to cause an end result could actually just be boiled down to one factor alone, I'd be devastated to learn that decades of being dedicated to the intricacies of my field were in fact a complete waste of time. As Carrie Lam herself pointed out in her policy address last year, as an export-oriented economy, Hong Kong must remain alert to external impacts. As an open, export-oriented market economy with significant foreign investment, the health of Hong Kong's economy is more tied to the trajectory of the international economy than the government cares to admit, rather than any standalone factor that affected the whole economy in a vacuum. Thirdly, Carrie Lam's claim that the current economy is worse than during the outbreak of SARS or the Asian financial crisis is unfounded. Referring to some economic figures back in June, after the demonstrations began, statistics show that the Hang Seng Index had actually gone up by 1,641 points, as the market anticipated a complete withdrawal of the extradition bill. Economic indicators such as the unemployment rate, deflation, consumption expenditure, stock market, and net economic growth also point towards a similar conclusion. The government needs to face up to the fact that the local economy is suffering at its own hand, namely the crisis of confidence brought on by the collusion between the police and the mafia, as seen in multiple cases around Hong Kong since the Yuen Long attack in July. Before the terrorist incident on the 21st of July in Yonglong, there were only 4 countries which issued travel alerts for Hong Kong, yet the number rose to 10 within a week afterwards. Even on days where there were no planned demonstrations in Yonglong, local shops, banks, and even governmental recreation venues felt the need to close early, with some of the businesses losing up to 60% of their turnover that day, in fear of a reenactment of the spine-chilling scenes of triads terrorizing civilians indiscriminately just days before. Political oppression now manifests as the police's excessively brutal clearance operations and selective law enforcement. This poisons what used to be Hong Kong's immaculate public security records as fear spreads within the community, with citizens and visitors alike baffled at the reality that mobsters are allowed to roam free and that the police may deploy violence without regard to the context and without limitations. Many international credit rating agencies and financial think tanks have warned that the authorities' sabotage of the rule of law and civil liberties must be recognized as the cause of a collapsed economy. The General Chamber of Commerce has made its stance clear that the establishment of an independent commission of inquiry for the events that are at the roots of the tensions is needed to restore peace and order. We can thus see that it is the Hong Kong government itself that has positioned itself as the enemy to our economy. Over the movement, protesters have indicated their deep gratitude for the understanding and tolerance that the public and visitors to Hong Kong have shown towards the resistance activities, which have inevitably affected many. They also hope that the public and the rest of the world sees the true backbone of Hong Kong's long-term economic prosperity is the just and fair legal and political system that activists fight to defend every day. Hong Kong is a world-class financial centre because of its safe, efficient business environment, which provides commercial certainty, on top of a robust legal and justice system as the basis of a democratic society. As these quintessential advantages are being eaten away at by the repeated attacks on civil freedoms and the rule of law by the police and the government, so are the fruits of the economy. Therefore, the pursuit of fairness and democracy goes hand in hand with that of economic prosperity. It is crucial for international investors to once again see that Hong Kong offers the right hardware in the form of its status as a free port and its infrastructure, but also the right software, its status as a free, democratic society underpinned not by the rule of bullets, but by a free society, a capable government, and the rule of law.
Hello, I'm Tim from RTHK. The airport has now banned protests in the airport in the near future. How are the protesters going to take the movement forward? And secondly, do you believe that infiltrators were to blame for the ugly scenes at the airport on Tuesday night, and the so-called genuine protesters have nothing to do with manhandling to mainland people? Thank you.
So to recap on what your questions were, your first question was how essentially this movement is going to move forward in light of the injunction order issued on the airport grounds. And your second question was whether the infiltrators or those who were posing to be protesters were to blame for the attack on several people on the night on which the airport incidents happened. Is that correct? Thank you. So, to answer the first question, we are saddened to see that an injunction has been the method resorted to by the government to impose their will on our freedom of expression. But as my colleague who was doing the Chinese speech has indicated, there has been numerous calls for different actions in different areas of Hong Kong, as has been the case throughout the last 2 months. And I'm sure that the people of Hong Kong will have other ways to express their voices as they're rightly entitled to, even in spite of this injunction. The second question regards infiltrators. For those who might not be aware, the police press conference has actually directly confirmed that those of their number have in fact posed as protesters in, black masks and black t-shirts and the like. So the fact that the government itself has actually admitted to this claim is commendable. We're glad that the government has stepped up to admit these correct allegations. But also, I would also like to stress that the violence or any violence or any injury towards anybody is not the original intent of any of the protesters. And in line of that, we're not really sure whether those people who've committed those acts were in fact infiltrators or not. But even if they were, we would invite the government to tell us any means by which we can adequately express our voices, where they would actually hear us, but we would actually not need to be injuring people.
Okay. This is from NPR, and I want to ask, if a protester is arrested for violating the court order against protesting at Hong Kong International Airport, what penalty do they face?
What penalty do they face? What penalty do they face? In violating an injunction, I mean, I'm no legal expert. That would be something that you probably want to ask the police. But according to what I know, it's absolutely, I think it's a criminal offence. And I think that there are lots of people who would be deterred as a result. But what I would like to stress is that the government has resorted to these tactics as labelling the freedom of expression as criminal, as illegal. That is not allowed under the Basic Law.
I think it's up to the Department of Justice to take the action to decide whether the action of the demonstrators who, despite of the injunction, still go to the airport. I think we are not the legal expert to tell you what will happen or what will not happen.
Hello, this is NPR, and I would like to ask, there's a retreat from the airport, and do you think it is a good idea to beat a tactical retreat? Sorry.
Sorry, I'm slightly confused. There is a retreat from the airport, did you say?
Because there's a journalist inside the airport and he couldn't find anyone to interview with, and it seems like the protesters have gone from the airport.
Yes. So what was the question, sorry?
So do you think it is a good idea to beat a tactical retreat?
Well, we are not, we're not, well, we're only a platform on which citizens can voice their opinions. We have no power to order, no power to command. As to whether it's a good idea or not, I think it really depends on what the frontliners think. We're not at the front line at this moment, and whatever judgment we say would not really be relevant to the situation.